I'm Dan Snow. Welcome to Voices of the First World War. In the years leading up to the centenary of the war, the last of those who actually experienced it have passed away. But the Imperial War Museums and the BBC had recorded interviews with many veterans to try to capture what it was like to actually be there. This series listens to those stories. In October 1914, Lance Corporal Joe Armstrong was in a frontline trench near Ypres with the loyal North Lancashire Regiment. They had strict orders. They were neither to advance nor retire.
It seems that they'd broken through, I think it was the Northamptons, captured the artillery, our artillery, they captured the headquarters, and they just swept us all in. But what could you do? We hadn't got to advance and we hadn't got to retire no matter what happened. Now then, would you like to know what happened when the Germans were on the top of... I'm in a trench here with the others. Would you like to know what happened? Well, naturally, same as the others, I scrambled out with my rifle in my hand, of course. I nearly got blinking bayoneted for having my rifle in my hand until I knew what I was supposed to do, throw it down. You don't get any instructions regards what to do in the event of being captured, you know.
A few days after Joe was captured, Sergeant Thomas Painting of the King's Royal Rifle Corps was also taken. This programme is their story.
3 Jerrys walked around the trench just behind me. One had me covered with a rifle, another with a revolver, another with a bayonet. Well, I'd just emptied my rifle and was in the act of putting another 5 in. I couldn't shoot because I hadn't got anything in there. I'd got a very bad position to get a grip on my rifle with the butt being open, with the bolt being back. Jerry gave me a chance to put my rifle down. He could have shot me in the back or he could have bayoneted me. But he gave me a chance to put my rifle down. I had to put it down, it broke my heart.
I had a pipe in my mouth. And when the officer came to me, and I was flank man, he saw this pipe and he grabbed hold of it and tried to tug it out. And I thought, good cracky, mentally and quickly, well, this is my pipe, so-and-so, and I stuck to it. A Corporal Taylor behind me shouted, "Let go of that bloody pipe, you fool." It's a good job I did, because almost at the split second that I let it go, his revolver was screwing around my blinking temple. That's true.
Well, we were going to take Rifleman Brown out. He'd got half his back shot away. The Jerrys made us put him back in the trench. And they put us forward, took us into a little bit of a dell. While we were in there, our artillery opened fire. They hadn't opened fire. The message hadn't got back to them, the serious or so, but they opened fire and they were dead on the mark. And a German officer said, England, he said, "The English artillery no good." He'd hardly said that before it burst. A bullet hit him. He was killed. The same shell that hit him caught me a glancing blow in the arm and knocked my arm black and blue for 3 weeks, but then I was lucky. But it was retribution from English artillery, no good.
How did you feel about being captured?
I'm inclined to think that he had very little feeling at all. Not that you was glad that it was all over or anything at all. It's hard to explain. You're a blooming animal. You're like blinking animals being led to the slaughter.
The conventions signed by both sides before war broke out demanded that prisoners enjoy important rights. This was at a time when few imagined that a war of such horror and intensity would rage between so-called civilised states. So perhaps it's surprising that these conventions were often observed, despite terrible, random slaughter on the front lines.
I don't know why, but I was a flank man, and I remember thinking to myself, because I think some of our fellas had shot some of when they'd captured individual Germans. I think a few, they never became prisoners of war. I think that's an obvious fact. But I remember thinking, well, if they start with the machine guns at my end, I'm one of the first. If they start at the other, well, I might be the last.
Then we were formed up, had to carry wounded Germans away, and going through the German lines, Well, as a soldier, I was pleased to see the number of dead that there were. But as a human being, I thought, well, look at that. Look at the trouble that's going home to wives, mothers, sweethearts. I said, as a human being. But I said, I was very pleased to see the price they'd had to pay for their success.
Anyway, all that they were doing was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, individually, just to get the count right. Then they marched us to Lille railway. They gave us a bowl of soup and a slice of black bread, rye bread, rotten bread. They put us in cattle trucks, 52 a cattle truck. We were in those cattle trucks 3 days and 3 nights. My particular truck was all right, but I understand that some of them, they got shovels full of red hot cinders and buckets full of hot water thrown through the bars at some of them.
On our way from Wervik to Lille, French women, the kindness of French women will never be forgotten. They threw fruit to us, chocolate, packs of biscuits, receiving blows from German rifles. In doing so, one woman with a tiny baby in her arms was knocked down.
Both Joe Armstrong and Thomas Painting were taken to the newly formed Güstrow camp near Mecklenburg in northern Germany. They didn't know each other, and as far as we know, they didn't meet there. But together, their stories give an insight into what is an overlooked part of the war.
Well, all that I can remember is these big marquees. And don't forget, this camp was about as big as Ellesmere Port. We were given a bundle of straw, which after a while was chaff, and a blanket, that's all.
10,000 men in it, in that weather. The camp was soon a morass. Then, not being able to have a bath or anything, we were soon very verminous.
I never had a bath, or a shave, or a haircut for nearly 6 months.
When I killed 365 lice alone on one shirt, you can imagine what the conditions were like.
The body lice drink your blood, like what blood you've got. When I got home after 4 years, I weighed 83 pounds, 5 stone 13. My grandmother said, good God, his face is less than a baby's.
And to get your food, the old camp used to line up, and there would be 12 dishing out places, you see.
We'd set off about 9 o'clock, it would be about 12 before we got down there, just shuffling along with your ball.
Then you get a ladle of soup. And when that soup had gone, you run out, well, if you were at your end of the line, you were unlucky, you had nothing. One loaf of bread every 10 days, which was very dark and contained sawdust and potato peelings and all sorts of things, but it got under the heading of bread.
After I'd gone about 100 yards further on, with my loaf of bread under my arm, I thought to myself, I think I'll go and see if I can get another blinking loaf. So I went across to one of the other openings further along. I got another loaf, all right, but a German sentry saw me. And I tried to tell him that this loaf under this arm was last week's blooming loaf, that I'd been sick, crank. Crank is German for sick, in case you don't know. I got 2 loaves, but not before he battered me around with the butt end of his rifle.
Before the war, Sir Roger Casement had won an international reputation as a human rights activist, highlighting appalling abuses in the Congo. But by 1914, he was in Germany, seeking support for the cause of Irish nationalism, and there were many Irish prisoners of war in the Güstrow camp.
Over the barbed wire, we noticed that they were building huts, and there was chimneys on these huts. But one day the Germans came along, and they got all the Irish together.
All these Irishmen were all collected, and Sir Roger Casement came and addressed them and asked them to form an Irish brigade, and told them if they fought on the German side, they would be fighting for Ireland, you see. And they were taken over to another part of the camp. Then they were asked to volunteer. Not one volunteered.
They realised our position. So one day, they raided all the canteens, chucked all the blinking stuff over the barbed wire fence to us, and in a day or two's time, they're all back with us. So that settled that lot. Now that is true.
Discipline was severe and the treatment was bad. Rahman Turner, he wrote home and said he was hungry, he got no food. And the Germans came down and got Harry Turner, Rahman, he was a South African veteran too. Tried him for writing home saying he was being starved. And in the camp there was a post, a 4-foot square wood, about 7 foot high. They put 2 bricks under his feet, tied him to this post, round his arms and waist and legs, took the bricks from underneath his feet and left him to hang there for 2 hours in a snowstorm. He was nearly dead when they cut him down.
I can't say that there was any ill treatment that I saw. Quite frankly, they were dying like flies, particularly the Russians, because the Russians were not getting it. We started getting parcels out. I remember getting a 5-shilling postal order when I bought bits and pieces. But the Russians, there was a continual stream of coffins all day.
As winter blew into that camp, fewer than 50 miles from the north coast of Germany, conditions worsened for the men on their straw beds and with their one thin blanket. It was in the interests of both sides to treat prisoners half decently. Men fight harder if they know they'll be killed if they surrender. Millions spent the war in camps, but the conditions they endured were truly awful. The courage they showed in the face of terrible deprivation was remarkable.
We had a terrific snowstorm, and the weight of the snow tore the top of the tent where we were, quite a piece of it, see, and we were lying in the snow for 3 days. And then they moved us out in a little wooden structure with the canvas just stretched over it like that. You see, one doorway, and we slept in that. We were quite comfortable. A German sentry came down. He said, "Sergeant, are you hungry?" I said, "Yes." And he gave me half his German rashers. Nice German bread and sausage. He said, "How many men have you got in the tent?" I said, 75. He said, "Got any tobacco?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, look out for me." He said, "I shall be on again at 2 o'clock. I'll bring you some tobacco." He said, "I know the British Tommy." He said, "I lived in England for 7 years." He didn't know what might happen to him. He might go to the Western Front, or he might go to the Russian Front, and he might be in the same situation as we were, and he would be glad of anyone to do the same, you see. And I wished him the best of luck wherever he might go, and hope that he pulls through, and I hope he did, because he had a little bit of human feeling in him, one soldier to another.
Thomas Painting escaped in 1915 and got home via Denmark. He became an instructor with the Royal Rifle Corps. Joe Armstrong was a prisoner for the rest of the war, becoming a policeman and later detective in the Special Investigation Branch of the Air Ministry. But it's the memories of their time spent as prisoners of war that has enabled them to leave their mark on history.